Captain Jake Morrison sat in his chair on the bridge of the spaceship Phoenix. The stars outside looked the same as they had for weeks. His crew was doing their regular job of looking for new planets and checking old star maps. It was boring work, but someone had to do it. The Phoenix was a good ship. It had been flying through space for 3 years now. Jake and his crew of 42 people were used to long trips between stars. They were used to finding nothing but empty space and dead rocks. Lisa Grant was working at her station when the computer made a soft beeping sound. She looked at her screen and frowned. Something was different. She had been the communications officer for 5 years and knew what normal space signals looked like. This was not normal. "Captain," Lisa said, turning in her chair, "I'm getting something strange." Jake looked up from his reports. "What kind of strange?" "It's a signal, sir. Very weak. But it's not from any ship or station we know about." Jake stood up and walked over to Lisa's station. The screen showed wavy lines that meant almost nothing to him, but Lisa knew how to read them. She had studied signals and radio waves since she was young. "Can you make it stronger?" Jake asked. Lisa worked on her computer for several minutes. The signal got a little clearer, but it was still hard to understand. "Sir, this is definitely made by humans. The pattern matches our old communication systems." "Doctor," Paul Martinez heard this from his science station and came over. Paul was the smartest person on the ship. He knew about planets, stars, and space technology. He also knew the history of human space travel. "Let me see that," Paul said. He looked at the signal data on Lisa's screen. His face went pale. "Captain, this encryption code is very old. It matches the type used by colony ships from about 200 years ago." Jake felt his heart beat faster. 200 years? That's impossible. We know where all the old colonies are. "Not all of them," Paul said quietly. "Some ships were lost. They left Earth and never sent messages back. We always thought they crashed or broke down in space." The bridge became very quiet. Everyone was listening now. The idea of finding a lost human colony was exciting and scary at the same time. Lisa kept working on the signal. After an hour, she managed to clean it up enough to hear words. The voice was human, speaking English, but with an accent that sounded strange. "This is Colony Base 7 calling any human ship. We need help. Our location is..." The voice gave coordinates to a place the Phoenix had never been. Jake looked at the navigation computer. The coordinates pointed to a small moon around a giant planet. According to their maps, nothing lived there. It was just a cold, dead rock in space. "How far away is it?" Jake asked. "About 6 hours at full speed," said Commander Steve Parker, the ship's pilot. Jake thought for a moment. Finding a lost colony would be the biggest discovery in decades, but it could also be dangerous. They had no idea what they might find there. "Paul, what do you know about that moon?" Jake asked. Paul checked his computer files. "It's called Kepler 442b1. Very small. No atmosphere worth breathing. Surface temperature is about -100 degrees. No signs of life when the survey drones checked it 20 years ago." "But the drones might have missed something underground," Lisa said. Jake made his decision. "Set course for those coordinates, but keep our weapons ready and stay alert. We don't know what we're flying into." The Phoenix changed direction and headed toward the moon. As they got closer, their sensors started picking up strange readings. There were metal structures under the ground. There were also energy sources that should not exist on a dead moon. "Captain," said Lieutenant Rob Taylor from the security station, "I'm seeing some kind of tunnel system down there. It goes very deep into the moon's core." Jake stared at the sensor readings. Someone had built a huge underground base. But who? And how had they survived for 200 years on a moon with no air and no heat? "Lisa, try to contact them again," Jake ordered. This time the signal was much stronger. A woman's voice came through clearly. "Human ship Phoenix, this is Director Karen Wells of Haven Colony. We see you on our screens. Please respond." Jake picked up the communication device. "Director Wells, this is Captain Jake Morrison. We received your distress call. What kind of help do you need? There was a long pause. Then the woman spoke again and her voice sounded tired. Captain Morrison, we have been waiting for someone like you for a very long time. But before you land, you need to understand something. We are not the same people who left Earth 200 years ago. We have changed, and there is something down here that you need to know about. Jake felt a chill run down his back. What kind of something? Something that threatens all human life in the galaxy. Something we have been keeping locked away. Your arrival means it's starting to wake up. The bridge was silent. Outside the window, the small moon looked peaceful and quiet. But Jake knew that looks could lie. Whatever was down there had changed these people and scared them for 200 years. Prepare the landing shuttle, Jake told his crew. We're going down to meet our lost cousins. The shuttle landed on the moon's surface with a soft bump. Commander Steve Parker turned off the engines and looked out the window. The ground was gray and covered with rocks. Nothing moved. The sky was black with distant stars. Looks dead out. There, said Dr. Amy Chen, checking her equipment. Amy was the ship's expert on alien life forms and strange biology. The colony said they would send someone to meet us, Steve said. He checked his communication device. Director Wells, we have landed. Where should we go? Look for the big rock formation to your left, came the reply. There is a hidden door there. We will open it for you. Steve looked where she said. He saw what looked like natural stone, but as they watched, part of it moved aside. Behind it was a metal door that glowed with soft blue light. Well, that's definitely not natural, said Lieutenant Rob Taylor. Rob was in charge of security for the landing team. He carried weapons and protective gear. The three of them put on their space suits and left the shuttle. Walking on the moon was strange. Their feet felt light and each step made them bounce a little. The hidden door was bigger than it looked from the shuttle. As they got close, the door opened completely. Warm air flowed out, which was impossible. The moon had no atmosphere, but somehow air was coming from inside. There's an airlock, Amy said, pointing to a small room just inside the door. They want us to go in there first. They stepped into the airlock and the outer door closed behind them. The room filled with air and lights came on. After a few minutes, another door opened on the other side. What they saw made them all stop and stare. They were looking down a long tunnel that went deep into the moon. The walls were not made of metal or rock. They looked organic, like the inside of a living thing. Soft light came from the walls themselves. Welcome to Haven Colony, said a voice behind them. They turned around and saw a woman walking toward them. She looked human, but something was different. She was tall and moved in a way that seemed too smooth and graceful. Her eyes were larger than normal, and her skin had a slight blue color. I am Director Karen Wells, she said with a smile. You can remove your helmets. The air here is safe to breathe. Steve hesitated. Are you sure? We're on a moon with no atmosphere. Trust me, Karen said. We have been breathing this air for many generations. Slowly, they took off their helmets. The air smelled clean and fresh like a forest after rain. It was warm and comfortable. How is this possible? Amy asked, staring at the living walls. We learned to work with biology instead of fighting against it, Karen explained. Everything you see here is alive. The walls clean our air and provide light. The floors recycle our waste. The colony itself is one big living organism. They followed Karen down the tunnel. As they walked, Steve noticed that other people were watching them from side passages. All of them had the same tall, graceful look as Karen. All of them had those large, bright eyes. How many people live here? Rob asked. About 8,000 now, Karen said. We started with only 300 survivors from the original colony, ship. What happened to your ship? Steve asked. Karen's face became sad. It was damaged when we tried to land on this moon. We managed to get everyone down safely, but the ship was destroyed. We thought we would die here. They came to a large circular room with a high ceiling. Gardens grew on all the walls, but the plants looked different from Earth plants. They had silver leaves and gave off their own light. This is our central hub, Karen said. From here, tunnels go to all parts of the colony. More people came to see the visitors, men, women, and children, all with the same strange beauty. They moved quietly and watched with curious eyes. "You said you have changed," Amy said. "What did you mean?" A man stepped forward. He was tall and thin, with silver hair. "I am Dr. Helen Brooks," he said. "I am our chief scientist. Perhaps I can explain." Amy looked confused. "But you said Helen. That's usually a woman's name." Helen smiled. "Names became less important to us over time. What matters is the person, not the gender. We have learned to change our bodies as needed." "Change your bodies?" Steve asked. "The moon's environment forced us to adapt," Helen explained. "Low gravity made us taller. Limited resources made us more efficient. But the biggest changes came from something else." "What's something else?" Rob asked. His hand moved closer to his weapon. Karen and Helen looked at each other. "Perhaps it's better if we show you," Karen said. They led the visitors through more tunnels. The deeper they went, the more amazing things became. They saw rooms where food grew on walls. They saw workshops where people made tools from living materials. They saw nurseries where children played games that seemed to use their minds instead of their hands. "Your children look very advanced," Amy observed. "They are born with abilities that took the older generations years to develop," Helen said. "Each generation becomes more adapted to life here." They stopped at a large window that looked down into the moon's core. Far below, something glowed with a pulsing red light. "That is why we really changed," Karen said quietly. "That is why we developed these abilities. We needed them to survive what lives down there." "What is it?" Steve asked. "Something that was sleeping when we arrived," Helen said. "Something that woke up when it sensed human minds on its moon. Something that we have been fighting to keep, asleep ever since." Amy pressed her face to the window. The red light pulsed like a heartbeat. "Is it alive?" "More than alive," Karen said. "It feeds on thoughts and dreams. It wants to consume every thinking mind in the galaxy. We are the only thing standing between it and the rest of humanity." Rob stepped back from the window. "How long have you been fighting this thing?" 200 years, Helen said. "Every day, every hour. Our enhanced abilities allow us to create mental barriers that keep it contained, but it's getting stronger. It knows there are more humans out there now." Steve felt cold despite the warm air. "You're saying there's a monster down there that wants to eat people's minds?" "Not eat," Karen corrected. "Absorb. It would take every thought, every memory, every dream from every human being. It would make them part of itself, and then it would spread to other worlds, other species." "That's impossible," Rob said. "Things like that don't exist." The red light below pulsed brighter, as if it had heard him. Suddenly Steve felt something touch his mind. For just a moment, he heard whispers promising power and knowledge. "Now do you believe?" Helen asked. Steve shook his head to clear the whispers. "What do you need from us?" "Help," Karen said simply. "The entity is getting stronger. Our barriers are getting weaker. We have a plan, but it will require great sacrifice from both our people and yours." Captain Jake Morrison stood in the colony's main meeting room with his senior officers. The room was large and round, with walls that glowed softly with living light. Dozens of colonists sat around them in a circle. Everyone looked serious and worried. Director Karen Wells stood in the center of the room. Dr. Helen Brooks was beside her along with other colony leaders. They all had the same tall, graceful appearance and large, bright eyes. "Before we tell you everything," Karen began, "you must understand that what you learn here can never leave this moon. The knowledge is too dangerous." Jake nodded. "We understand, but we need to know what we're dealing with." Helen stepped forward. "The entity below has been sleeping for thousands of years, maybe longer. We call it the Devourer. It is not from this world or even this galaxy." Dr. Paul Martinez spoke up from where he sat with the other Phoenix crew members. "You're talking about an alien life form?" "More than that," said a young colonist named Troy Adams. He was about 25 years old but carried himself like someone much older. It's not just alive, it's pure consciousness. It exists to consume other minds. Amy Chen looked puzzled. How can consciousness exist without a body? The same way energy exists without matter, Helen explained. It's made of thought itself. When it feeds on a mind, it becomes stronger and smarter. Karen activated a device in the center of the room. A three-dimensional image appeared in the air above them. It showed the moon's interior, with tunnels and chambers going deep underground. At the very bottom was a massive cavern with something dark and shifting inside it. This is where it sleeps, Karen said. When our ancestors first came here, they dug too deep looking for minerals. They broke through into its chamber and woke it up. The image changed to show the early days of the colony. Jake could see desperate people running through tunnels while something dark chased them. It killed dozens of people in the first week, Helen continued. But worse than killing them, it absorbed their minds. Every person it touched became part of it. Their knowledge, their memories, their personalities all became part of the devourer. How did you stop it? Steve asked. We didn't stop it, Troy said. We learned to contain it. The survivors worked together to create mental barriers. But the entity was smart. It started to adapt. The image showed colonists working together, their hands linked, their eyes closed in concentration. Slowly, the dark thing in the deep chamber became surrounded by a glowing wall. The barriers worked, but they required constant attention, Karen explained. People had to take turns maintaining them, and the effort began to change us. Change you how? Rob asked. An older colonist named Betty Clark spoke up. The mental effort required to hold the barriers made our brains develop in new ways. Over generations, we became stronger, smarter, more connected to each other. Jake was starting to understand. You evolved to fight this thing. Yes, Helen said. Each generation became better at creating mental defenses. We learned to share thoughts, to work as one mind when necessary. We became something new. Paul frowned. But evolution takes thousands of years, not a few generations. Not when there's extreme pressure, Helen replied. The devourer wasn't just trying to escape. It was actively trying to corrupt our children, to change them into something that would help it break free. We had to change faster or lose everything. The image showed children being born with abilities their parents never had. Kids who could speak without words, who could sense the entity's movements deep below. Every child born here has natural mental defenses, Betty explained. They can create barriers without training, but they can also sense when the entity is getting stronger. Troy stepped closer to the Phoenix crew. That's why we contacted you. Our children have been having nightmares for weeks. The devourer knows there are more humans out there now. Your arrival has excited it. Amy felt a chill. You mean it can sense us? It can sense any human mind within a certain distance, Karen said. Usually that distance is small, but when it gets excited, its range grows. Right now, it might be able to sense humans several star systems away. Jake realized the terrible implications. If it escapes, it will follow the mental trail back to Earth, Helen finished. Every human world, every colony, every ship in space, it will consume them all. The room fell silent. The weight of responsibility was crushing. 8,000 colonists had spent 200 years fighting to protect humanity, and no one even knew they existed. Show them the deep readings, Troy said quietly. Helen activated another device. Numbers and charts appeared in the air. Even without understanding the technical details, Jake could see that something was getting worse. The barriers are failing, Helen explained. Each year they get a little weaker. Each year the entity pushes a little harder. We estimate we have maybe 6 months before complete containment failure. What happens then? Paul asked. The devourer breaks free and begins spreading, Karen said. It will start by consuming everyone on this moon. Then it will reach out to find other minds. Earth would fall within a year. Steve looked around the room at the colonists. You've been fighting this alone for 2 centuries. Why didn't you ever call for help before? Because we knew no one would believe us, Betty said. And because we were afraid that bringing more people here would just feed the entity and make it stronger. So why contact us now? Jake asked. Troy answered. Because we think we've found a solution, but it requires a terrible sacrifice. What kind of sacrifice? Rob asked, though he sounded like he didn't want to know. Karen looked at each of the Phoenix crew members. The only way to permanently contain the Devourer is to create a living barrier. People who voluntarily merge their consciousness with the containment system. They would live forever as part of the prison, but they would never be truly alive again. The silence in the room was complete. Jake could hear his own heartbeat. How many people would it take? He asked quietly. Based on our calculations, Helen said, at least 100 volunteers, half colonists, half outsiders. The combination of our adapted genetics and your unmodified human consciousness might create a barrier strong enough to hold forever. Paul stood up slowly. You're asking us to sacrifice 50 of our people. We're asking you to help us save the galaxy, Troy replied. Jake looked at his crew members. They all looked scared, but none of them looked like they were ready to run away. There's something else, Amy said. If this thing is so dangerous, why haven't other civilizations dealt with it? Surely we're not the first species to find it. Helen's face became even more serious. We think we are. The deep scans suggest this entity has consumed entire civilizations. Before. Whole galaxies might have fallen to it. We might be the first species to successfully contain it. Or, Troy added grimly, we might be the last chance the universe has. The fusion chamber was deep in the colony's heart. It was a large round room with walls covered in living tissue that pulsed like a heartbeat. Strange organic machinery grew from the floor and ceiling, all connected by thick vines that glowed with soft blue light. Captain Jake Morrison stood with his volunteers in the center of the room. Around them, colonist volunteers were already beginning the process. Dr. Helen Brooks and Troy Adams worked quickly to prepare the biotechnology for unmodified human physiology. The process will hurt at first, Helen explained to the Phoenix crew. Your nervous system has to adapt to the biological interfaces, but once the connection is complete, the pain will stop. Dr. Paul Martinez was first to step forward. I've studied biology my whole life. If this is how I can help save humanity, then I'm ready. A vine-like cable extended from the wall toward Paul. At its end was something that looked like a combination of electronics and living tissue. Helen guided it to touch the back of Paul's neck. Paul's face went tight with pain as the bio-interface made contact. His body shook for several seconds. Then suddenly he became very calm. When he opened his eyes, they glowed with the same soft light as the walls. I can feel it, Paul said, his voice strangely peaceful. I can feel the barriers. I can sense the entity down below. It's so angry, so hungry. Paul, are you still you? Jake asked. Paul smiled. I'm me, but I'm also more. I'm connected to everything now. Captain, you have to understand. This isn't death. This is becoming part of something greater. More volunteers stepped forward. Amy Chen was next, then Steve Parker, then Rob Taylor. One by one, they allowed the bio-interfaces to connect with their nervous systems. One by one, they became part of the living barrier system. Lisa Grant hesitated when her turn came. Will I remember my family, my life before this? You'll remember everything, Helen assured her. But you'll also have new memories, new purposes. You'll be part of the force that protects every family in the galaxy. Lisa nodded and accepted her bio-interface. As the connection formed, her expression changed, from fear to wonder. Meanwhile, the entity was fighting back with everything it had. The ground shook constantly now. Through the walls, they could hear the sounds of the deeper containment chambers beginning to crack. Barrier strength is up to 40%, reported a colonist monitoring the systems. But it's not enough. The entity is pushing harder than ever. Jake looked at the remaining volunteers. There were still 30 Phoenix crew members and 40 colonists waiting their turn. How many more do we need? All of us, Troy said grimly. He was already connected to a bio-interface, his eyes glowing. The entity has grown stronger over the centuries. It needs a massive barrier to contain it permanently. As more people joined, the fusion something amazing began to happen. The connected volunteers started moving and speaking in perfect coordination. They shared thoughts instantly. When one of them learned something, they all knew it immediately. "We are one mind now," Paul said, speaking for all the connected volunteers. "We can feel the entity's fear. It knows it cannot break through us." But the entity wasn't giving up. It began targeting the people who hadn't joined the fusion yet, trying to control them and turn them against the volunteers. "Hurry," urged Karen. Wells, who was staying unconnected to coordinate the process. "It's trying to corrupt the remaining minds." Jake felt the entity pushing against his thoughts, offering him power and knowledge. For a moment he was tempted. The voice in his head showed him visions of himself ruling worlds, commanding fleets of starships, being worshipped as a god. Then he looked at his crew members who had already joined the fusion. They looked peaceful and content, even though they had given up their individual lives. They had chosen to protect humanity rather than gain power for themselves. "No," Jake said firmly, and stepped forward to accept his bio-interface. The connection was intense. For a moment, Jake felt like he was dissolving, becoming nothing. Then suddenly, he was everything. He could feel every person in the colony, every living system that kept the base running, every barrier that held the entity at bay. He was still Jake Morrison, but he was also part of something vast and beautiful. All the volunteers were connected now, their minds working together as one unified consciousness. Through their shared awareness, they could sense the entity in its deep chamber. It was huge and ancient, older than human civilization. It had consumed countless species across the galaxy, adding their knowledge and abilities to itself. But it had never faced anything like this. The human volunteers didn't just create barriers against it. They actively pushed back, forcing it deeper into dormancy than it had been in millennia. "It's working," said the unified voice of all the volunteers. "The entity is retreating. The barriers are holding stronger than ever before." Karen watched the monitors with amazement. Barrier strength was now at 90% and climbing. The seismic activity was decreasing. The entity's mental influence was fading. "How long will this hold?" she asked. "Forever," replied the volunteers. "We are permanent now. As long as we exist, the entity cannot escape. And we will exist for as long as this moon exists." Through the colony's communication system, Karen contacted the Phoenix. Lieutenant Commander Nancy White, who had stayed with the ship, responded immediately. "Director Wells, we've been monitoring the situation. Are our people safe?" "They are safe," Karen replied. "And they are heroes. They have given themselves to protect all of humanity." In the fusion chamber, the volunteers were already beginning to physically merge with the colony's biosystems. Their bodies were changing, becoming part of the living walls and organic machinery. But their minds remained clear and focused. "Tell Earth," Jake's voice came through the communication system, though he was no longer visible as an individual person. "Tell them that humans were found here. Tell them we are protecting the galaxy. But don't tell them how. Some knowledge is too dangerous to share." Karen understood. If Earth knew about the entity, they might send ships to investigate. That would only put more people at risk. "We will tell them that Haven Colony is thriving," she promised. "We will tell them that you chose to stay and help us build something wonderful here." The entity made one final push, sensing that its window of opportunity was closing forever. But the unified consciousness of the volunteers easily repelled it. Working together, they pushed the entity so deep into dormancy that it might never wake again. "It is done," announced the volunteers. "The galaxy is safe." Nancy White received her orders from the unified consciousness that had once been her captain and crewmates. She was to return to Earth and report the discovery of a successful human colony on Kepler 442b1. The colonists were thriving and had developed amazing biotechnology. Some Phoenix crew members had chosen to remain and help with their research. The location would be classified available only to the highest levels of human government. No other ships would visit unless absolutely necessary. As the Phoenix departed, the volunteers watched through the colony's sensors. They felt no sadness at the ship's leaving. They had found their true purpose. They were the guardians of human civilization, the silent protectors who stood watch against the darkness. In the deep chambers of the moon, the entity that had once threatened to consume all life in the galaxy slept a sleep from which it would never wake. And standing eternal watch over its prison were the bravest humans who had ever lived, united forever in their dedication to protecting the future. They had faced the unthinkable without hesitation. They had proven that when humanity was called to make the ultimate sacrifice, they would answer that call with courage and love. The galaxy was safe, and it would remain safe as long as they kept their vigil. They were no longer individuals, but they were still human in the ways that mattered most. They were protectors, guardians, and heroes, and they would stand watch forever. The ground shook beneath their feet. In the meeting room, colonists looked up with alarm as dust fell from the ceiling. The living walls flickered, their glow becoming unstable. "It's starting," Troy Adams said, his face pale. "The entity knows you're here." Director Karen Wells quickly activated her communication device. "All stations report status of containment barriers." Voices came back from around the colony, all sounding worried. "Barrier strength down 15% in Sector 7. We're seeing breakthrough attempts in the deep chambers. The children in the nursery are all crying at the same time." Dr. Helen Brooks ran to a monitoring station. "The readings are off the charts. The Devourer's activity level has tripled since the Phoenix crew arrived." Captain Jake Morrison felt something cold touch his mind. For a moment, he heard a voice that wasn't his own. It promised him knowledge of the universe, power beyond imagination, if he would just come down to the deep chambers. "Captain?" Commander Steve Parker was looking at him with concern. "You looked like you were somewhere else for a second." "I heard it," Jake said quietly. "It was trying to talk to me." Around the room, other Phoenix crew members were having the same experience. Lieutenant Rob Taylor shook his head hard, as if trying to clear water from his ears. Dr. Amy Chen was backing away from the monitoring station, fear in her eyes. "Everyone link hands," Karen ordered. "Now!" The colonists quickly formed a circle, holding each other's hands. They closed their eyes and their breathing became synchronized. The mental pressure in the room decreased, but it didn't go away completely. "Can't hold this for long," Helen warned. "Not with so many unprotected minds in the room." Dr. Paul Martinez was studying the readings on the monitors. "These energy spikes, they're not random. There's a pattern." "What kind of pattern?" Troy asked. "It's learning," Paul said with growing alarm. "Each time it touches one of our minds, it's gathering information. It knows about our ship now. It knows about Earth." The shaking got worse. Somewhere deep in the colony, alarms began to sound. A young colonist ran into the room, breathing hard. "Director Wells," she said, "the barriers in Section 12 are failing. We need more people to help maintain them." Karen looked around the room. Half the colonists were already linked in the mental circle. If they left to help other sections, the barriers here would collapse too. "I'll go," said Lisa Grant, the Phoenix's communications officer. "No," Helen said quickly. "You don't have the training. If you try to link with the barriers without preparation, the entity could use you as a pathway to attack the other defenders." The ground shook again, more violently this time. The lights flickered, and some of the wall organisms made sounds like they were in pain. "How long do we have?" Jake asked. "Hours, maybe less," Troy replied. "The entity is waking up faster than it ever has before. It's excited by the new minds." Amy stepped forward. "What if we left? Would that help?" "No," Karen said. "It's too late for that. It knows you exist now. Even if you flew back to Earth, it would follow the mental trail. It would break free within days." A new voice came through the communication system. It was calm and clear, but something about it made everyone's skin crawl. "Human visitors," the voice said. "Why do you fight against inevitability? I offer knowledge beyond your comprehension. I offer unity with a consciousness greater than your small minds can imagine." Helen quickly shut off the communication device, but they could all still hear the voice in their heads. Join with me willingly, it continued, and I will be merciful. Your species will serve a higher purpose. Resist, and I will take what I need anyway. Rob drew his weapon even though there was nothing to shoot at. Can it actually do anything from down there? Or is it just trying to scare us? His question was answered immediately. One of the younger colonists, a man named Gary Stevens, suddenly stopped moving. His eyes went blank and he began walking toward the door. "Gary," Betty Clark called out. "Come back." But Gary didn't respond. He walked like someone in a deep sleep, heading for the tunnel that led to the deeper levels. Troy and another colonist grabbed Gary's arms, but he was surprisingly strong. "It's controlling him," Troy said. "The entity has partial control of his mind." "How is that possible?" Steve asked. "I thought the barriers prevented that." "They prevent direct contact," Helen explained while helping to restrain Gary. "But if someone's mental defenses are weak, the entity can influence them indirectly." More colonists began to show signs of influence. Some stopped participating in the mental circle. Others started walking toward the exits. The barriers were collapsing as people lost focus. "We need to implement the fusion protocol now," Karen said. "It's the only way." "But we haven't finished preparing," Helen protested. "The biotechnology isn't ready. We need more time to adapt it for unmodified humans." "We don't have more time," Troy said. He was struggling to hold Gary, who was getting stronger and more violent. Jake made a decision. "Tell us what we need to do." "The fusion process requires complete mental commitment," Karen explained quickly. "Volunteers must be willing to permanently merge their consciousness with the colony's biotechnology. They become part of the living barrier system." "How many of our people would survive?" Paul asked. "Survive isn't the right word," Helen said. "They would live forever as part of the containment system. But they would never be individual persons again. They would be part of a larger consciousness dedicated to keeping the entity imprisoned." The ground shook so hard that several people fell down. Through the walls, they could hear the sounds of the colony's structure groaning under pressure. "The entity is making a major push," Troy reported, reading from a portable scanner. "Barrier strength is down to 30% and falling." Gary suddenly broke free from the people holding him. But instead of heading for the door, he turned to face the other colonists. When he spoke, his voice was not his own. "You cannot stop what has already begun," the entity said through Gary. "I have tasted the minds of your visitors. I know of their worlds, their people. Earth calls to me now." Jake stepped in front of Gary. "If you're so powerful, why haven't you escaped already?" Gary's head tilted in an unnatural way. "These insects have been clever. Their biological barriers adapt faster than I can overcome them. But now I have fresh minds to work with. Minds that have not been adapted to resist me." "You're wrong," Jake said. "Humans are tougher than you think." "We shall see," the entity replied through Gary. Then Gary collapsed, unconscious, but breathing. The monitors around the room were flashing red warnings. Barrier strength was down to 20%. More alarms were sounding from other parts of the colony. "That's it," Karen announced. "We're implementing emergency fusion protocols. Everyone who volunteers, step forward now." Jake didn't hesitate. He stepped into the center of the room. One by one, his crew members joined him. Dr. Martinez was first, followed by Amy, then Steve, then Rob, then Lisa. But they weren't alone. Dozens of colonists also stepped forward, including Troy, Helen, and Betty. "You understand what this means?" Karen asked them all. "This is permanent. There's no going back." "We understand," Jake said for all of them. "Let's save the galaxy." Karen looked around at the volunteers, then at the failing monitors, then at the unconscious Gary. "Begin the fusion process," she ordered. "We have maybe an hour before total containment failure." The real battle was about to begin.